Well, you've certainly set me a challenge this time, Raggy. I can't resist it, because after doing those 2 studies for you and you being so grateful and so kind about it, and I was struggling as well, I must admit I haven't been doing portraits a while, I thought I would set myself a further challenge and cheer you up even more, because that was your wife a few years ago and she's a very attractive lady still. And I thought, well, it'd be rather nice, having just made friends on Facebook now and seen some photographs of her. I've taken this one off with the Liberty, and I think it would be a very nice one to do with her present day as a pastel. So I'm going to use a large sheet of Ongres paper here, and my soft pastels, the Unison pastels, and some other colours as well, to have a go at a large portrait, something I haven't done for a long time. So it'll certainly push me, and I hope that it justifies the time and the materials by representing your wife and making a reasonable job of it. And hopefully you'll be pleased with it. We'll see anyway, so I'm going to struggle with this, I know, but it'll be a good challenge for me, won't it? So while I'm doing it, I'll share it with you guys. So we're moving from the acrylics this time to the pastels. There's my set of Unisons. Nice big sheet of paper ready to go on the drawing board. And the first thing we're going to do is just mark out into quarters and eighths, so halfway quarters, possibly eighths on the long side. I'll do the same on the photograph and then just see if I can get this basic drawing mapped out to proportions before I start working up the colours.
taking a photograph of the actual work and then putting it next to the photograph you're working from on the computer can be a very useful way of seeing discrepancies. Here you see the actual picture, and then just afterwards here I show you the actual picture when I've narrowed it down a bit, when I've squeezed it a bit, and you can see that actually I've got the face a little bit too wide. And of course the colours, we need to get the colours changed because it was painted in artificial light. So after this now I'm going to go on to making my adjustments and making my final work.
Well, as you see from those photographs, which unfortunately bring out some of the colours a bit too much as well, the face is a little bit wider here, and I want to just bring it down a little bit, not too much. Also adjust these colours, which were done in artificial light, so that they're going to be a bit strong on the blues in places, and we'll have to darken those back a bit. So I need to just come in here and take this down a fraction with the dark, so that it just merges into the background here a bit more. Where his shoulder starts to come there. Don't want too much texturing of the paper left behind. As I say, artificial light will make us paint blues more strongly to counteract the yellows you see, and this is what's happened here. Just bring these blues down a bit. Green's a useful colour to have on there because the green will let the reds come forward and balance it a lot better. Got a lot of just fine adjustments to do just here at the minute. You see the difference that makes already. It's brought a whole face in more. And to play with these very light colours. Really trying to find these colours in here. I think that adjustments, it's worth, I know it's a bit of effort, but it's worth making these adjustments. Narrow that eye down a fraction. So let's help those glasses a bit. Take a touch of orange just into these glasses here, just to lose them a little bit. They're just a bit too stark there. Be very careful that I don't work across to one side. I must stay in front of the picture as much as possible to see what I'm doing. I don't think we're far out now. Now let's look at the colours again, because as I say, with the artificial light and now with the daylight now we can see the colours a bit more clearly. I can see my blues a bit more clearly now. But a more finished piece. It's not quite so impressionist as my usual, perhaps. A little more photorealistic in some ways. The face is still a little bit wide, I think, but we're not far out. Coming back to the dark down here, because all of this could be cut away. You could easily lose a lot of this down here. Paper's too long anyway down here. Yes, we'll do it in black. It'll just remain subtle. One last close look at it. Modelling is handled. All these reflected lights. Well, the other day I had a telephone call from a new student, young lady who contacted me via the SAA, and she said, can I tell her anything about oil pastels? Well, oil pastels are not a thing I do a lot with because I find them rather limited, but I thought it would be rather fun to give her a free session just to get her introduced to it and see what she wanted to do, what progress she was to make before moving on to having further lessons before I go back to France. So she's coming this afternoon, and I've already prepared a small lesson for her here. And what I've done is I have watercolours out, I have oil pastels out, I have ordinary cheaper chalk pastels and my unison pastels as well to show her the difference. But I'm just going to run through what can be done, the basic techniques in the first free hour with her, to show her what can be done with the oil pastels that she has. And then she'll do a small snow scene with me using mixed medium. We'll use the Chinagraph pencils, we'll use the oil pastels as a resist for watercolour, and then we'll try and even use some soft pastels over the top of that at the end, so we'll get the best and the beauty of all. So what I've prepared here already then is we've got the watercolours ready, we've got the pastels ready. I've got this chart here to work on with her. So what have we got here? We've got acrylic paint on there, we've got acrylic ink on here, we've got watercolours here. I'm now going to just cover this over with some black oil pastels which we'll use for sgraffito. I want to show how sgraffito can be used on these as well. And then in this area here we'll learn about blending with the fingers, by cross-hatching, with overlapping, pointillist, terps and spirit and scumbling. So those are really all of the main basic techniques we can use, and you'll get some ideas then of how we can take it further. So January has arrived, as in the 1st of January, not the month. We haven't even got to April yet. And she's got a wonderful set of Senneliers here, which are the tops. And they'll be much different to the much cheaper ones, which is exactly the same as when we're using ordinary pastels. The difference, and I'll show you those again in a minute, is so totally different. The creaminess and what you can do with them is so totally different. So these are much heavier body, and of course were brought about by the artist Picasso, who wanted a much softer body to be created for the use with the oil paints and oil pastels. Right, so let's have a look at what we can do close up. So there's January's set, beautiful set of oil pastels, and the first thing we'll do is just look at the cheaper ones as compared to those in the marks we can actually make, and even in blending. So on blending we're going to look at using our fingers to blend, cross-hatching, overlapping, pointillist technique, just using a little bit of terps to blend, which can be very useful if you're doing mixed media work as well, and a bit of scumbling as in the texture of the paper. Do you know what scumbling means? No. Right, so dry brush is literally with a dry brush and a stiffer brush we tend to put a thin layer of paint over the surface of another layer of paint on the surface of the paper. Scumbling is a little bit similar in that we use a little bit of paint on the brush to bring over the surface of the paper or over another paint. In this case, we'll be bringing it one colour over another. Although if I were to scumble on here, even with one of your pastels straight away, very likely that's scumbling. You can just see the surface now coming. And look how lovely and soft those are. As if straight away I take one of the cheaper ones, and I try to do that very thing, the scumbling, and it only just comes out, it only just starts to show. Right. So these are harder and not as creamy as the more expensive ones will be. So you've done the right thing there in getting a good set. What I wanted to show was a technique that I saw being used at Burton Douglas Hall years ago, where somebody was priming board and painting quite smooth MDF with strong colours, and then actually applying the oil pastel over the top and scratching through, which can be very, very effective. It's another way. Let's look at different mediums as well, different ways of working. Let's start with the blending. And the usual way of blending is with a finger. So if you've got those pictures handy, you wanted to recreate, you've got an idea of what you want to do already, that's good. So we're looking at doing effects like these. You can already see on here the way that we can put one colour over and next to another. So we've got these colours blending into each other, and we've also got a dark colour showing through there. So I'm suspecting there may be a darker coloured paper underneath there from the start, in which case we might be using something like an engrais pad, which in this case here we have a pastel paper. Before we go on to doing the actual demos, let's just discuss the whole thing. So this is ordinary white watercolour paper. This is a knot paper, so it's not rough and it's not smooth, it's in between. So the texture of the paper is going to be it's going to give you a very different effect again. The engrais papers you can get like this, and don't be fooled by the way that they come, because you see there's a sort of linen-y texture on top, not the side you want to use. The side you want to use is the smoother side, even though there's texture on there, because the bite isn't in the surface texture of the paper, it's on the actual surface of the paper itself, not the texture. So we can do really good pastels and water and so on a smooth watercolour paper just as well as we can on a textured. The texture can get in the way. If you want an orange peel texture, it's great. If you don't, then it gets in the way. So if you were doing snow, wouldn't it be great? Because you could get the snowy effect by putting the dark on first and the light afterwards. Now this means that you could tint the paper first with something that will still allow us to paint on top, which is what I was just doing here with some of these. And I put on acrylic inks here, very, very finely, but it would allow the pastel to go top. Now these are the cheaper pastels. Let's just see what happens when we put one of your softer pastels over this. So this is acrylic ink. I've put the bright pink and some cerulean blue there. This is ordinary acrylic paint. This is watercolour. So it's interesting to see how the pastels will go over the top, isn't it? So we've got some cheaper white put over there. Can we find a white in yours? So we got a, that's it, probably one you've already been using a bit. Let's just see, you see this is the cheapie here, but look how beautiful that is. That's wonderful, isn't it? I mean, I could work with this now. I couldn't work with these bits of stuff because they just wouldn't work. So you've certainly done the right thing in buying some quality materials. But that means that I can then scrape through that. So we could do sgraffito work. It's called sgraffito.
Right.
Which we're going to show on here in a moment. Here we do sgraffito down here. Let's just take, for instance, across here. These hard ones take a lot of rubbing, so they're quite difficult to scrape off. But if we now take, say I wanted to do a multicoloured parrot with a dark background, I could have areas of colour like this, and then put a dark background over the top and scrape through, then my parrot feathers and so on showing through, which is why I looked at that and thought, well, yes, we could link these. So what I want to do is not say, this is the only way. What I want you to do with me is keep an open mind, and I know you want to do these pastels, I know what you want to do, and I'm going to help you do that, but keep yourself open to other ideas as well, because there's so many exciting things to do in art, there's so much fun to have. So we want to be looking at the mixed medium stuff, we want to be looking at not just one way of working with these pastels, but exploring and taking everything further as well. You've got some beautiful colours. So maybe this idea of sgraffito could be of use to you with something like this. So we've got a coloured paper there.
So could you do that with a coloured paper, or would it have to be sealed with some sort of paint?
No, if you've got the coloured papers already, so that should work. But I think the coloured papers like this will be difficult because they're absorbent. We will try that in a minute, but you'll find that they'll actually take the colour in, and they'll be difficult to scrape through. If we do it on a board with paint, which is a harder surface, which isn't so absorbent to surface, or if we do it on paper like this, then you can see we can scrape through and it will work all right. So, and another thing as well is the coloured papers, however expensive they are, don't tend to be fixed. They don't tend to be permanent. They tend to gradually fade.
Right.
Even the pastels, even the best quality, we've tested, when I was at Camberwell, we tested them in the sunlight in a window and left them for only 3 or 4 weeks. And even then, with a piece of paper over the top, when we took the paper off, they had faded. Even the top quality material, so sunlight isn't good, but it just gives you an idea. So what I tend to do when I want a coloured background is I tend to use acrylic inks, which are more permanent, or a good quality thin paint, to make a coloured background like that, which will remain permanent if we need it showing through. So yes, you're all right having the background paper like this, but it will gradually fade in the background, so it will change the effects you've got. Whereas if you were to paint a background, it won't.
Right.
Yeah? Now remember, the pastel paper can actually be stretched like watercolour paper as well if you ever need to use that, and have a tight surface if you're using water or anything with it, but you won't be using water much. So we've had a little look at that. Now let's literally just start scraping onto this. Take some of your bright pink, there's a lovely bright pink over here, your lipstick. And look how thick that is on there, it's beautiful. Then we'll take a light over a dark. In our armoury in painting, we've got warm and cool, we've got light and dark, we've got rough and smooth. And then we've got the opposites in the colour circle, red, green, purple, yellow, all of those things. And then we've also got, they said that the colour hues as well. So every single colour, looking at your beautiful colours here, this is a cool green, this is a warm green, because it's more browner, it's more yellowy brown than this one. That's a very warm green. When we come to the purples, it's more difficult, because is a purple a warm or a cool? So that would be a warm cool, that's a cool, that's a warm. But it would also be a cool warm, because it is bluer than this one. So every single colour we've got has a warm and a cool. And I tell you this because as we get more advanced, and I don't expect you to take everything on in one go. We gradually do this bit by bit. I'm just giving you, I'm feeding the bird seed out to get the birds interested, you know. It'll all come together gradually. I'm just giving you this because we know why and what we're doing. If we wanted something warmer in a painting, we don't keep putting things warmer. We put something cooler next to it.
Right.
So if we want smooth, we put rougher next to it. If we want dark, we put lighter next to it. If we want, we put the opposites together. So here we've got a warm on a dark, a light on a dark and a warm and a cool. Let's take a dark onto here now and see how that shines through. One of your lovely deep blues, and these are beautiful colours, but look how thickly we can lay them on. It is important with oil pastels that we lay them very thickly. We can scumble, yes. Let's put a scumble colour over there. If I just take this and do it lightly, this would be called scumbling. So it's very, very light over the top and the dark colour comes through underneath. And because of the texturing, it's broken colour. Now broken colour is what the Impressionists used, Monet. He would not paint orange, he would put red and yellow dots. The pointillist technique, which we're going to look at over here, he would put them together to make an effect of orange when the eye is fooled. The smaller the dots, the more it's fooled. So this would be a pointillist technique because the texture is allowing the blue to come through, so it's giving us an almost purpley brown from a distance, whereas that is much thicker. Right, having done that, let's just put a lovely dark onto here as well. We'll take something in one of your deep blues again just for the fun of it. Let's just see how this works. Now this is quite absorbent paper, so I'm not sure how well this is going to work. Now that's almost scumbling it across. Feathering is very light strokes like this, and that's scumbling. So feathering is little feathery marks like the end of a feather. This is scumbling going over the top, and this would be impasto. This would be paste impasto, laying it on heavily. Now if we wanted to get some wonderful effects here, how can we? Let's have a look and see. If I take my knife and just for the fun of it, try to scrape through there, I'm hoping this is going to work. let's zoom the camera in, because I'm saying not done this before, it's all exploratory. Let's see what we can do. Let's get off, take the camera with me. If I now try and scrape through this one, oh yes, look at that, isn't that fun? So if we were going to do your birds or something, we could actually have whole colours going, not just, we could have one colour against another, we could actually work out our bird colours. So say we had a bird with bands of colour of parrots, whatever underneath, you could use the acrylic inks underneath, which wouldn't affect your breathing problems. And then we could put lovely, deep, rich, darker colours on top, or light on the darks of the parrot underneath, either way, and then we could scrape through for the feathers, leaving the darks behind. Isn't that wonderful? So there already we've got a way of going about this further than what we would have done. So that's just basic. This is more advanced. We've now already gone from, we'll have a look at the pastel paper in a moment. And from here again we're going now from the light to the dark again. That was dark to light. If we take that white away, we go from the light to the dark. Down here, this is the cheek pastel, but you can see how we can get quite nice effects. And again, depending on what you cut through with, if I used a comb, I could get different effects, a metal dog comb or something, to what I can with the knife here. Your very dark one here, look, and we can get all these lovely effects scratching through. So straight away, we've got ways that we can get smashing effects by sgraffito. And that could be done even on MDF with a priming of Indian ink. So a priming of white emulsion first of all. Indian ink will go onto the white emulsion, which will give you that luminosity, but it would be a board rather than the paint, paper. Or we could use the inks on paper, and so on. We've got all these different surfaces. You're not just stuck now with paper. So straight away you've come here thinking paper only. No, we've now moved from watercolour paper. We'll have a look at pastel paper in a moment. Then we're going to go back to how we can blend these. This is the pastel paper. Let's just see for fun. I'm going to work on the back of this pastel paper just to give us an idea. This is how it comes in the sheets of tracing in between. Right. So a different sort of paper altogether. If you feel that, and then you feel this. Should I blot that? Yeah. It's more blotting papery, isn't it? It's more, There's more texture to it, there's more surface. So this is bound to soak this in more. I wouldn't be able to paint onto this so easily. I couldn't put acrylic inks on this, they would just die and they'd soak right in and they'd be lost.
Okay.
Acrylic paint is possible, but you'd be much better off using a good watercolour paper or even a card. Now mount card would be lovely because mount card Have I got any lying around? I think I have. Mount card is slightly heavier and it's slightly shinier on the surface, and that actually I haven't thought about that one, but mount card would be a lovely one to work the acrylic inks on and then the oil pastels onto, so that's worth thinking about.
Okay.
And most, I have tons in France, so spare, I can bring some back for you next year, but the offcuts I have I just don't use because I only do bigger pictures. But most mount cutters would be able to let you have some cheaper pieces of offcuts of mount card.
So that's what it is.
Mount card. It's acid-free mount card.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
An acid-free mount card, and if it's they come in various textures as well. If it's too smooth, it's going to be difficult. It wouldn't take the pastel. It might not even take the ink. So you want an ordinary mount card, a matte mount card, with a pearl effect possibly. That could be very interesting and useful to try, couldn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's nice to work on as well. Mm-hmm. So let's have a look at this then and see what happens. Let's just see what happens when we want to scrape through one thing to another. So we'll take our light first, just for fun. I can see on there, yes. There's some lovely light. And I'm going to put it quite thick, yeah. And I'm going to take some very dark. Now with two things going to happen, we could start blending. I want to see if we can actually just layer one over the other and what happens. So there we have impasto, light and dark. Let's put some of the yellow over that and try not to blend it. So if we can go thickly over it, we can just, but it's trying to blend immediately. So I've got to be pretty clean to get that to go over there, haven't I? But I know I can get this to go, but again, I don't want it to blend. And that's what will happen, because that's what, so if it's nice and pure. Can I now scrape through, or am I going to have to be using techniques like the acrylic inks? Let's find out, shall we? Fine, very delicate look, yes we can just, but it's slightly messier. But now we can see how you could get the effects of those feathers on your birds. We don't just have to do it with the pastel tip. We can also scrape through, and we can also blend out from there as well with the different effects. So straight away, even on pastel paper, so that's pastel paper as compared to the watercolour paper. Right, coming back then, so much to take in, so much fun to have. Let's come back now straight away to our little demonstration sheet, and we'll look at, these are the standard ways that you'll find on YouTube that people have got to. I had a quick look to see what else there was, and people haven't gone very far with it, possibly because the other mediums are more versatile. Mm-hmm. But all I've seen them doing is these. I haven't seen them doing graffito. I haven't seen them doing any of this on there.
Okay. And
it was an artist that was doing this in Burton Agnes, and she was doing these lovely coloured landscapes. She was painting all the backgrounds in of the landscapes, the base colours of the trees and flowers and things, and then putting pastels over the top and scratching through to get the effects of the textures and the leaves and all that sort of thing. So
right.
Really
with oil pastels.
Yeah. On top of the paints. Mm-hmm. Okay, blending. So the most simple one is the blending. So again, I'm not going to use my cheapies at all because they are rubbish. I had fun with these. Oh yeah, one other trick you can do with pastels is you can actually take one of these little lighters for the ovens, like even a cigarette lighter, but the longer ones are better, you don't burn your fingers, with a gas, and you can melt the pastels. So you can actually melt pastels and trickle them around things. So when I was doing mixed media abstract work, I found that I could, with oil paints, I could actually melt and trickle these and things around the oil paints, which I couldn't do with the oil paint. So again, it's exploration. Mm-hmm. All I'm going to do is hopefully enthuse and excite, and then you can go away and think, well, these ideas, yeah, try them, Pete, and then come back to me and show me, and we're away. So blending, you sound very enthusiastic about what I do. I just love it. Painting is eating and drinking to me. I can't live without food, my painting. Right, blending. So we'll take, what two colours should we have? Let's do what the ones we were just doing because they're rather fun. So we'll take some yellow and we'll put it down and we'll rub it in, smooth it in. This is a bit mucky because my finger's got a bit of green in it. But if we do it too lightly, it's going to scumble and leave the surface showing through, which is all right when we're wanting that colour to show through like this. But if we want it solid, we've got to push it much harder. Mm-hmm. Got to break our pastels up. Take a nice light yellow there as well. Take a slightly lighter one down here. Let's look at that. That's cleaner because I haven't messed it up. Now, if we want to make an orange there, we've got oranges, but we can blend. And now, the first way of blending is with the fingers. So if I put some orange there, nice and thickly, then again, if the pastels are quality, we can smooth them out with that, keep them clean. You can take the pastel that's on your finger, usually the darker into the lighter. Right. Because it's harder to get the lighter into the darker, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And we can bring that one into the other look and actually blend them together so easily. Now that was just straightforward blending. I can bring one over the other and blend.
but that's a blending one into the other. Now if that were in watercolours, we would say that would be wet next to wet, because one colour goes into another, and this would be wet into wet because it's going into the colour. Okay, so the wet next to the wet in, blending with the fingers. We've got the overlapping, which is what I was just doing there. So if I take, that was bringing one colour into another. If I take your yellow and just go right through, and again I can smooth it first. I can't imagine this probably has mucky fingers. That's another thing we want to keep, is how to keep fingers clean. And this could be a slight problem for you if you have respiratory problems, because you really will need a spirit. I can't think of what we need to find a solvent that you can use. That there must be some on the market, because there will be people with your problem.
Yeah.
So what we need to do now is look up solvents that aren't problem for respiratory delicacies, and then you'll need to wash your fingers in between using, or have a rag or something with a little bit of this on. Otherwise you're going to get, just as I'm getting, it's going to tint, it's going to smudge, it's going to make, if you want clean colour. So you'll need some form of rag or something that hasn't got fumes coming off it to be able to clean your fingers in between blending colours. So we said this is overlap, so we've got now that one and that one, and last time I just blended it in. But if I overlap slightly and then blend, we get the same effect, but it's more gentle that way. It's slightly heavier this way, perhaps. There's not. It's like Elgar. It's themes on variations on a theme, isn't it? It's almost the same as doing the blending one into the other. It's overlapping it, and then again overlapping. Though it does give us the opportunity to play with these colours. Let's take a purple, for instance, over here. We're going to have to overlap or overlay if we're going to put one colour over another now. If I was here, then that would be like this one, that would be blending it in. But if I'm here, it's directly overlapping, and then it's how much we go as to how we bring it out and how strong we are. So we can make the colour stronger by giving it a second coat and blending it out. So we've got blending, we've got overlapping, and then we've got laying on top of the colour, which is also overlapping. So already we've got those. How detailed can we go? We can start to work in very light feathering with this, and then you have a problem with these huge things called fingers. So then I start to think, well, do we start using tools? Do we start using a cotton wool bud, where you can actually lift out, and that lifted that colour out there, look, as well. If it's clean, it's possible we could find ways of actually lifting the colour out with it as well. Using tools. Do we start using a cotton wool bud, where you can actually lift out, and that lifted that colour out there, look, as well. If it's clean, it's possible we could find ways of actually lifting the colour out with it as well as blending with it. If it gets mucky, it's going to blend. If it's clean, you might have to lift out. As we could, if I put a little bit of, I suspect, of terps into this. We're going to talk about blending with the terps in a minute. So I'm going to keep that one clean so we can lift out when we come to the terps down here. Let's take two different colours again. Don't have to keep using the same colours. And what should we have this time? Choose two nice opposite colours that would be nice. What about this one? Something like that. Would that be nice? Yeah. What would you like to go with that?
About that.
Those two? Yep. Good idea. Lovely. So again, we want to blend, but this time we're going to be working with the white spirit and just seeing what the white spirit will do. Shouldn't be too much of a problem on your lungs. Bring that down to there, nice and heavily, again there, and a bit light. I'm going to go very light here for a reason, you'll see in a moment. Put that one back there again, and we'll bring this one up here, heavily here, and very lightly here. And this time I'm going to take a little bit of white spirit, terp substitute if you like. And I said there will be other solvents, I'm sure you can find. I've got some solvents there from the SAA, for instance, that are useful for removing oils and acrylics from one's clothes. It might be that one would do it as well. Let's have a look. Oil, paint, dilutant and brush cleaner. Now I don't know. Let's have a, if I flake out a flop on the floor. Yeah, it's quite strong, but I don't know. Dare you smell? It go on clothes, it doesn't do any harm on clothes, as compared to the white spirit. If you give that a sniff, it's stronger. Yeah,
much bit stronger.
Right, so it might be that stuff comes from the SAA, and it's oil, paint and brush cleaner.
Okay.
So we'll try that. Shall we try that in a minute and just see how
Yeah.
it works? Yeah. Let's take a clean cotton wool bud. I think I held that in front of that just now. Yep. Right. And we'll see what happens when we put a bit of this onto there. If I just put a bit here and use my finger, you can see already how it thins it out, and it's almost like painting with watercolour.
Mhm.
And if I want to blend with them, I can use that to get a much smoother look effect. And I suspect I could even use a brush. Let's have a bit of fun. Let's take a wee brush. Because we want as many techniques, as many arrows to our bow as possible, don't we? So if we take this brush, oh yes, we can lift paint with it, and I suspect we're going to actually be able to pick up the paint and paint with it as well. Yeah. So we can turn our oil pastels back into a thin version of oil paint.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at your picture here again of this, we can already see how we could get these effects with a brush, bringing those out into your wanting another colour, can't we?
Mm-hmm.
So already we've seen direct ways of doing it, but if we can't get in there with the very big pastels or we won't find the detail, we can use a brush. And I have found this as well with the soft pastels, because I'm using the great big unison pastels, and they're very hard to do fine work with.
Mm-hmm.
So we played them with white spirit. Let's have a little go with this. Let's just see what this brush thinner will do, because if it doesn't smell as badly for you, it may be a saviour for you. Let's make sure my finger's dry. Yes, it will, won't it?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's even more gentle. So there's a thought for you.
Okay.
And it's not as smelly. No, that seems to be quite good.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We're inventing all the time as artists. We're always, this with that, this plus, and we're going to be finding new ways. So we've got blending now with that. Scumbling we discussed earlier, that's putting one colour over another.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just do that again, and we'll combine. So there's already our scumbling effect. Now if we just make that right the way across here, now because that paper is slightly rough, if I put a colour over that, it's going to let the colour underneath glow through because of the rough paper. So this is scumbling, and now you can see that textural work just coming through underneath. If I want to be much stronger like your pictures are there, I've got to push much harder. Right. And that, I think, is where the problem starts to come. With soft pastel, the problem comes with too much pastel.
Okay.
And then you can't put pastel on pastel on pastel.
Yeah.
So you have to get a stiff brush and brush it away. How are we going to get rid of that? Well, we already know we can lift out with the thinner, don't we?
Yeah.
So we could lift away and put more colour on again, I suspect.
Uh-huh.
And this is what we want to do. I'm just giving you ways to have fun at home and to explore and see how far you can go. Yeah. Cross-hatching. Now, wonderful thing, cross-hatching. It goes around a form. I'm going to show an example on the screen now, which you can see later when you go back to my YouTube. But I did one years ago, a still life when I was painting in Pipington, and we go around the form. So, for instance, if I had a green apple, got a little leaf coming off there, and we make that totally green. Now I can blend onto that to make things lighter or darker, and I can go on the outside to make things lighter or darker. So let's take, what's that? Is that a black or a deepness of a deep purpley blue or something? Let's go around the outside of this with a fairly dark colour straight away, just to make the thing stand out. So we've got already light against dark, just for the hell of it. So I'm going to go right round that, and I'm going to blend the outside just a little bit, which will give me a feeling of roundness, because if I come into that form slightly, look, it's going to just give me a shadow around it, isn't that? Just a little bit. Now, if we were doing a standard apple on this, we can get one colour over another. You can use it thinly, or we can build it up thickly. We would gradually tint and build this up like brush marks. But in cross-hatching, it's a bit different, because in cross-hatching, we tend to go actually around the forms themselves. Make sure I've got this on, yeah. So I would start to bring little marks around the form, and this is better with a smoother paper, because now I'm getting the problem of the texture with a smooth paper. Cross-hatching is
like netting. It's crisscross, 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 one across another gradually. And same with the reds. We start to bring red in. It's just little lines rather than blending of colour. And that would be in little lines like this, except the texture's getting in the way. You get the idea of cross-hatching.
Yeah.
It will go in and it will go around the forms. You're gradually building it up, one across another with cross-hatching. Quite different to the blending. If I did the blending there, it's totally different in texture. But you would need a smoother paper for it to work. Works better with coloured pencils or pens or things like that, but that's cross-hatching. And that should have been there. So pointillist. Now, here with the pointillist, we've got two ways of doing it. We can go straight in with our green, again, with the apple, and we can just blend that in. Or from the very beginning, we could have done little dots of colour, like that. And then we can go over the top, gradually building up our shadows until we've got no white left, or until the colour underneath. You can see the white is getting in the way there, but we'd have to gradually lose that. And if I wanted it to be deeper around the edge, then I would gradually, and again I'm tending to work from light to dark. It's much easier, much cleaner that way. But you can see how we can start to get the effect of an apple coming there now, and the shadow will come out here. And I put darker points into that shadow. Nice deep blue here, that deep blue down here, to go around the corner. But so instead of doing the mixing of red and yellow to make orange, this is where I do the red and yellow dots from a distance to make orange and gradually build it up. So cross-hatching, little lines across, crisscross, crisscross. Pointillism, making it all up by little dots. If you look at a magazine article or a magazine photograph, if you look closely, that's how they do it.
Right.
The dot printer, the dot matrix printer is what it is.
Yeah.
It's one little dot against another, and because they get away with only a few colours, magenta, cyan and so on. But those are all the basic techniques I've seen being used on YouTube, and we've added to them with doing underpainting and sgraffito. So I don't really need to show you much more, I don't think, on that.
Okay.
For us to get these effects of your birds, so we wanted to do these birds, we've got undercolours there, and then we've got colours on top. This is where I think the thing gets difficult. It's when we want to put lighter colours over darker. How will that work? Something like this, will it become mucky, or can we actually do it? If we don't make the undercolour too thick, I think we can get away. Let's take the sparrow here, for instance. Let's take a very deep purple grey. What's that one? Let's take that one, and we'll just, so the say the bird shape is this, approximately. Got his tail coming down now, put a tail in too. And I'm going to just cover the whole of that in a very light coat, because I want a thin coat. So I made that quite a thin coat, deliberately. I can add more to it, but I'm sure if I put too much on, I won't be able to put the light over the top, so we'll explore with that. Here I'm going to put a little bit more. And then we've got those colours behind there as well, so I'm going to put a deeper blue just for fun, just to see how far we can get with this. So that blue there might do it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just go thinly around the bird. Again, you'd be better off with a smooth paper, I think, for this, unless you really wanted texture.
Right.
So hot press, Archer's hot press is a nice one for this, or the pastel papers. If you get a fairly smooth pastel paper, wouldn't work. Right, I should be able to lay my lighter colours over that, and my darker. So if we take a really dark one now, then we can start to get this feeling of the bird. And we can use texture, because we can just, so I'm a bit thicker, but I wouldn't be able to lay that very easily onto a thick colour, would I?
No.
It would tend to, the colour underneath would come through as it would with the blending.
Yeah.
So we're working up a thinner colour underneath just to get the basics. Now let's go to our next, to our white, and then we'll go back to the grey in a minute. No, we only do the grey first, we'll do a bit of grey first. So I'm going to work up a little bit of this grey on top. It's fine enough that where it's not too thick I can put the... So I'm building up, in this case, from dark to light. Now in watercolour it's the other way around, we have to build from light to dark. So let's get these little effects of the feathers, just like it is there, as much as we can. Little strokes, and you see the texture of the paper's helping me to do that. And the harder I push, the less the paper's going to show. Then on the outside, we'll look at the lighter green here, the blue I mean, green, blue, blue. Now together,
So you want to show out a bit so you can go around the outside. And already we're getting that feeling, it's coming, isn't it, of that. So let's go up to the white next, and we'll just put the cheeks in. And you can see now, because I haven't got too much pastel, I should be able to gradually build this up on top. Again, a smoother paper, I wouldn't be getting the texture of the paper, but we're almost there, little beak here. Yeah, not far off, are we? And the thicker I put this, then the more white we're going to get. The thicker I put it, look, we can go nice and creamy, just like oil paint, and that's the beauty of a better quality material. We've got a slight bit of warmth coming now, we've got this like pinky colour, so you've really got to look for your colours if you want to get it something like that. So maybe we go to this slight mauve, and we start to build that into there, look, just a little bit, just to get, so you can see the colours coming down here. Yeah? So you've seen how now to get your effects you wanted. So you can play with that now with different papers, with underpainting, with, I've given you the basics of the techniques, you now can do what you came to do. So should we have some fun now and take it a stage further and go totally mixed medium and have a go at this China graph and snow scene? But that's giving you what you wanted to see, hasn't it, really? So you've come and you know all the basics there are that we've seen publicly of how to use the oil pastels, the blending, the fingers, the overlap, and so on and so on and so on, and the underpainting. Now we want to use China graph pencil, watercolour, and these pastels, we're going to use them with water over them to see how well they resist, which I've never done. And blow me, but Janu's actually brought across her own proper pastel pad, and what I was just saying, the very thing I was saying about smooth and hot press papers, here is, and she's already been doing, I see some texturing here, so you're well on the way. This is the same feel as a hot press paper, and I said about 300, and this is just over £300 because it's quite heavy stuff, but that's exactly what I'm saying. That is just like, and that's like a mount card finish as well. So you would find offcuts of mount card quite useful, and it would already have a colour underneath. So you can buy the coloured mount cards, cream, brown,
and that colour stays on card
pretty well, because it's acid free and it's pretty strong stuff. Everything that I faded, but with the pastel over as well, it's much better than the but So what I normally do is just mark the photograph up on a scene like this into basics. The inks will actually, the paints will actually tint these just slightly. So what I want you to do is very roughly, and this is going to give you scale, we've got a textured paper which is going to work against us in some ways but for us when we come to the snow. Where there's a light piece, leave it light, but it doesn't matter because we can deal with the oil pastel in a minute. I want you to put these in as black as you can. So this one, really, that's a good question. So do we need to do more drawing before painting? If we're doing figurative painting, then drawing is a foundation to it, and it is important to be able to draw fairly well. So having lessons in perspective, having lessons in tone, texture, form, scaling, all of these things are quite important, yes. Okay, we've got, it's difficult because we've got the sunlight coming through here, it's not good for the camera, but it'll be alright. Now we've got the China graph pencil on. What I want to do now is going from lights to darks. We would normally put white pastel in at the very end. We would go now from our darker colours with watercolour up to the light pastel. But just for fun, I want you to do a little bit of the oil pastel techniques on here. And let's say, for instance, this sun, which is what, about there, is it? Yeah. So if I make that white with the oil pastel, thickly, and then we start to work those colours out with the oil pastel. So it's a very, very light yellow first of all. I'm just going to blend with the pastel itself. I'm not going to use my fingers, I'm just going to blend with the pastel one into another. So there's our lovely yellow coming outwards at first here. If we put the pastel on, it's going to resist everything else. But look, we can still just see the black underneath, which is rather lovely. So they are slightly transparent, which is nice. If we make them thicker, then we will lose that gradually. And I'd just like you to tint in these yellows where you see them here and there. So little dots and dashes of yellow coming right down through here.
So
wherever you see the yellows, just
stippling.
Yeah, stippling. That's right, stippling and blocking in 1-2 areas like that. Maybe you can use your finger a bit if you want. Use the. If you go from light to darker, we can actually start to blend into these other oil pastels we've already got a little bit with the tip of the pastel, not with the finger. Don't want to smudge it too much, and just bring these little bits of dark. When you've done that, then we'll move on to the very light pink, okay? Yep.
And where does that?
Well, that's all over. It's coming through here, look, and down into here. So we've got this pink, and it's through into the edges here. It's coming through right up into here. Look, there's little bits of snow coming down through there. We're going to put some of this in with. What I want to do, I've got enough colour on there and texturing for fun. I'd just like you to put some of the whites in, not all of them. Let's look at some of these bigger areas. Off we go. So what we're going to do now is use the Unison Pastels. You see the lovely qualities we've got here. Now just feel that pastel there with your finger. Right, now feel one of these. Totally different. These are lovely and creamy, but they are soft. Right, I want to do the watercolours first, and we'll use a nice big oval mop for that. This is a 1-inch Pro Art oval mop. They're wonderful brushes. You know, Ron Ramsden can paint with a heat brush like that and the rigger. I can get away with this and a round or a rigger to do almost an entire painting. So
right.
Very, very useful brushes. You can paint that way, you can paint that way, as we're going to see in just a moment. We're going to work from our lights to our darks, and we're not going to leave any white at all. But look at the different colour hues we've got here. The acidic turquoise blues here and the much warmer ultramarines here. This is not so easy now. We've got some darks here as well if we need them, so we've got the dark set of unisons and we've got all of those. Not using those yet, those are to finish. So you can see what you're doing, there are the colours, because this for instance is a much more turquoise, that one there.
Right.
And we need to know these colours. Let's start with our yellows, and we want to do wet into wet. We're going to drop wet into wet. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to wet the entire paper first, this yellow now. Don't worry about that, because even if we did go over that, look, it's still there. It's going to resist. This is the beauty. So we start with these colours working right the way through. Look, we're going to lose all of the white, isn't it? So again, we can start to bring that in and let it just, don't take out all your, I'm using the tip of the brush more now. I'm just letting that brush just come in and let the effects of paint, let the effects be controlled accidents, as I say. Let them spread one into another just with the tip of your brush. So we're starting to get these controlled accidents coming through here. So all of this is white oil pastel, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great. We can bring that all the way down. That glow comes all the way down into here. Now we're going to start on the blues, and we're going to start with our cool blue, which I hope is going to be this one. Yes, that's it. So that's our nice turquoise blue, and that's the one we're going to paint the whole of this with, straight off with that turquoise blue.
So if it starts to get mixed too much, this is where I would get
bring it back. Yeah,
bit of
we're
a
going to lose a lot of this
muddy
anyway,
colour.
because I want to go all purple. Now we want to go to our ultramarine, which is a much warmer blue, and let that really, now we can get these lovely fairy effects by dropping that in. So you see these marks like that. We can just be careful how far they spread, so spread them out quite well. Some lovely colours there, that's really starting to happen. Right, if you've got a big blob here you're not happy about, then suck it up. Get the brush and suck it out. So wherever else now, because we're going to go darker yet with these blues, wherever else you might see that behind here, look the way that those trees just come up there. Start to get some of these branches in all the way through here, and trees, and that's it. Really feel those darks, and that's beautiful. Look at the paint you're getting. I mean, you probably turn around and say, forget the oil pastels, I'm loving this. Okay, all the little branches over here, now that's it, pick it up from there and we'll use it over here so we can start to get these little tiny branches, lots and lots and lots. Just the tip of recording. So we're just going to let that dry off. That done?
Yeah, I think that's not too bad.
Okay. Now you see, look at that texture you're getting now, isn't that beautiful? That's a lovely bit of painting. Now you're turning out a piece of real art, you see. Dare I say it? It's smashing. Stop. So quite strongly in places, push quite hard to make it strong and clean, and otherwise it's not going to go on, especially over the wax. We're putting in the final marks with the chalk pastels now. So we've used oil pastel, watercolours, Chinagraph pencil, and the soft pastels, the unisons. I think it's anything rude. So this lovely cool that comes through here, and it is there now. I put it in, you can see it now I put it in, but before you might not have seen it, so sometimes you've got to pick up something and actually put it in to really see it. Even the way that there's little bits of blue ghost up here and behind here. Now what did we say the opposite to red was in the colour circle?
Green.
Right, so we're going to take a very, very deep green now, and I just want you to use a bit of the green amongst the trees and here, just to add a bit of, you see what that does? It's going to bring those warms out a bit, so we'll just use a bit of that. Well, I think personally that's absolutely gorgeous. Now, honestly, what do you think? Are you happy with the way you've done that for your first time?
Yeah, that's good.
It's nice, isn't it? And we've not only done that, we've done, so there we are, the whole lesson today, 2 hours, talking about oil pastel. I hope that helps you as well, to introduce you to the medium of oil pastel. With our new student here, I'm sure I'll come again and show you some more later. Well, this morning we're going out in the garden because the flowers are really coming out now. Although there's not much sunshine yet, there will be later, but we'll make a start now while it's still cool. And we're going to try acrylic inks first and pastels and then go on to acrylics. Well, the gardens are just coming onto their own now. The sun's not out at all yet, it's still very grey, but I want to have a go at showing Margaret how we can use this mixed medium of pastels and acrylic inks and water and so on. There really are some lovely compositions in this garden now. Even inside the greenhouse things are still coming up really well, with tomatoes growing here and the peppers coming on well now as well. The composition I'm looking at this morning is behind me, but at the moment you can see just how beautiful the garden is, how it's come up. And we've got all of the cabbages and the beans and everything come up really well now. So I'm very pleased with my little potager. I can't do a lot of work, but we're going to have a go at these big red poppies. That's what we're doing this morning. I'm going to do a loose wet into wet acrylic ink and pastel of these, see if we can manage that to give you an idea. Must be a painting here as well. Board side by side so Margaret can be beside me. We've got the Unison pastels here, including the new dark set they've offered, which is lovely. And I've got a tray for my Indian inks, which I'll need to be more level. I'll put that down a bit more that way, otherwise the inks will be spilling out everywhere. The Indian inks are down here, also not Indian inks, acrylic inks, using the FW acrylic inks, my brush sets, and also a spray there, diffuser spray, which is very useful because if you want to keep things wet. Jar of water. Let's just get these inks out, the colours we're going to need. And I'm going to want the red, of course, so I'll start off with that. Get a good shake up first. You can actually draw with these bottles as well. The nozzles have a rubber top here, and you can suck out the ink you want and then squeeze it in. And you can actually draw with these as well, which is rather nice. So I shan't want, this very, very strong, I shan't want too much. You can't put them back in again as well, so that's a bit of a nuisance. So I'm also going to want some orange as well. Now, like watercolour, we're going to start with our lightest colours and work through to our darkest as we go along, all in one go. So hopefully I've given that a shake enough. They've been settled for a long while, that can take some getting going. So I've got another palette here, I'm just going to put some greens out as well now. We'll do quite a bit of the work with this, and I mean, as I say, sometimes we find we don't even need the pastels. We just enjoy ourselves so much with these colours that the other ones aren't required. Let's see how we do. Right, those are FW acrylic inks, and the full set of that I use of Unison pastels plus the new dark set on the left. Put the inks out, these acrylic inks, yes. And we're going to use them with water with a wet into wet technique, and also we'll need a diffuser as well, so I'm going to need this little water spray to keep it wet and warm. Now, it would in some ways be better to have this flat. We've got a table here because it won't spread, but it's going to trickle down the paper a bit this way. It can't be helped, it doesn't really matter because we can go over with pastel. All I want to take in is the poppies and the lupins. I'm going to bring that lower poppy closer up to the top ones for the obvious reason, to fit it into the paper, although actually it makes quite nice. Pity this one isn't just out because that would be nice. You can watch me first if you want. You don't have to. Yeah, it might be an idea because when you see the mess I'm making, you're going to think, "What?" I've done this when I was at Burton Agnes Hall when I was painting there, loose like this with pastel and these acrylics, which is where I invented this. I wanted a stronger watercolour and I couldn't get the vibrancy I really wanted with watercolour, so I used the acrylic inks to get it.
Okay.
Then I needed to tighten around them, so I started using pastels as well. And this is where I started to develop the water and pastel, because I can use the pastel with the water too. So this is how the invention came about 20 years ago. It's almost as smooth as hot press. I didn't want texture for this, so this is an SAA practice paper. It's quite a reasonably priced one if anybody's interested. It's quite a good paper actually, the SAA practice paper. Much cheaper than buying more expensive brands. Right, nice and wet, and we want to keep this wet. Once the acrylic inks dry, they're dry. You can't move them. All the while they're wet, you can control them. Yeah.
So watercolour you can lift out, but you can't lift that ink.
To a degree, but these are very, very strong, and this is why I want them. So it's going to trickle down the paper a bit. If you wanted it flat, you've got to get a table out for yourselves. I haven't got, unfortunately, magenta. I thought I might have. So if I want to make that pink, I'm going to have to either do it with my pastels later, or now we paint darker. We paint darker to put the light pastels on top. So it's like when I was saying the painting you've been doing with me, we work from our medium tones down to our dark tones and then work back up again to our light. We're going to put the highlights back in with the pastels. So what I want at the moment is to get these lovely effects of wet into wet, and I really want to keep this paper nice and wet. I don't want any dry edges on this. I'm going to have to spray it otherwise. Flooding down the paper. Let's start off with the lupins and see if I can find something like the colour I want there. I'm going to start with a little bit of lemon yellow at the top of that lupin here. Painting wet into wet. You see, you can paint it just as delicately as just as delicately as watercolour. So I'm just putting a thin coating in there at the moment, just to find my way. And I want that thin because I want a very light colour yet, and I can put the other colours in later. This is just to get the effect of my lupin, as I would in a watercolour painting. So I'm painting it very light, I would in the watercolour technique at the moment, wet into wet. Now I don't want hard edges, so I'm going to come back into this in a minute and deliberately spray it so it spreads everywhere. As with wet into wet watercolour, you have to know how far apart the spacing of the marks you're making will be before they close up and you've got just one blob of paint.
Yeah, I was going to say if it's spread, it'll all just spread in together.
If you spray, it's going to spread even more, that's right. And we can move this around to suit the composition as I want a bit at the moment. Looking for those colours, really searching for those colours, going darker and darker into here. And I can do the detail and I can cut in with the pastel afterwards, so I'm really not concerned about detail or getting them correct. I want the effect of light, and I want the vibrancy of colour that I can get with this, and you're going to see in a minute. Now, I'm going to have to start spraying because the paper is drying out all over. Well, I want to keep, and if I spray that once, be careful, you see how that spreads? I've had this happen. I did a painting in New Zealand for some children at a school of a green cow. I made the cow green for fun. And I sprayed it like this, and they started laughing, and I thought, what's going on? Because I was facing them. When I turned round, the whole cow was coming down the paper because I'd sprayed that once too many. You see how that's coming down?
Oh, well, I've sprayed, I know, I always spray too much.
Lovely effects this way, so we're going to just use
and
these
all
effects. I'll come back to yours in a minute.
The lupins are running.
So I'm using a brighter orange now to come into this. Usually with something like this, we play the warm reds against the cool reds, in other words magentas against cadmiums. I can't do that in this one today. I don't have that range of colour, but I do have enough to try and get this lovely effect, and I can work in with the pastels later. And again, with the pastels, remember, I can come in with water as well. I don't have to just stick to so you get this lovely, this tremendous vibrance of colour. So it's observing very, very quickly, which is what you've got to get used to. It's one of your problems you found. You can't just slap the marks in any way. You're still observing and making marks that are about, if not exactly, no, but marks that are always about what you are painting. That green is there, and you wouldn't have thought of looking for it, I'm sure. But that green is there, it's reflecting from the flowers around. It's going to kill it a bit, but it will give it more vibrance also. But we don't want just one blob of colour happening here. So that's happened a bit there, look, because I sprayed it and it's dropped right down. But I can go back in with the pastels over that later, I'm not too worried. Those marks come upwards. It doesn't matter if it floods around a bit, doesn't matter at all. Come back up into these, they're drying. You see those are drying off, so I need to just keep that wet if I want to go dark into there more. See that spread down there, which is a nuisance. You can lift out, but it's not easy because it tends to stay in hard edges. Not yet. Keep them soft. Don't worry, because I'm going to go back in with pastel. That's a nuisance, that one.
I think the bottom one looks good.
Down, but, I mean, yeah, it does give the
I quite
effect,
like
but,
that abstract look.
yeah, well, it does, and they say you can use it. But I want to lose
Gosh, that one's...
acrylic inks, which is what I'm after. And I do love this turquoise in this one. The acrylic inks are beautiful turquoise in this. I'm just feeling those leaves, flatter the brush more now as well as the tip to find the edge of the leaves. Marks that are about the leaves all the time. If it wasn't on the vertical, I'd be much more in control of this painting now because it wouldn't be all dribbling down the middle of it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be able to... I say, it's such fun that you might well say, oh no, I'm going to keep it just as it is and do another one and then we'll come back on it later. You've got to be so careful with the...
I was going to say with that spray, some sprays it comes out too fast.
Yeah. So there's various perfume diffusers you can get. Let's put a bit more purple out. And some of them are a fine mist, you know, being a lady. I don't use many perfume sprays, so I don't know these things.
Get one and it's half an hour, do you think? Just
that,
looking
yeah.
to see how long it took.
No idea.
It's 11:30.
So there's a start to our loose acrylic ink work. I say a lovely bright way to work, and now when it's dry I'm going to work over with pastel and we'll see how Margaret does with hers. It's dry enough to work now. Take long.
Yeah, I should have done.
So at this stage, before I do any more with pastel, I can still come in with a bit of the stronger colours. You found it? I've got it. Where it was? Yeah, that's lovely. It's a lovely bright colour. So much better. Keep the colour clean. You work up from the light orange to the red.
That's right.
You need to do your brush every time because you're going to lose colour. You had yellow on it, it doesn't matter if it goes into the orange, but do flick it off first. That's it. I just start with my pastels and I figure I'll start to pick out some of these colours. Let's start with an orange on the... And you see how we can just pick out the shapes. It should be just dry enough now. Now I can use water with this as well to blend them if I need, and I might do that later. At the moment I just want to pick up on these. You see what I'm doing here, Margaret?
No,
yeah, see the way it's working. I'm just using the pastel not to lose the vibrancy I've got, but to pick out and sharpen up edges. Is that all right? It's a bit dry, isn't it? It's starting. It's not yet. You need to spray that a bit. I can go back in with darks as well yet. I haven't finished by any means. I can come back in and make darks and use my brush and water as well as a mixed media piece. Yes, that's fine. You know, that's right. Now you can go to your background and
My greens.
yeah, I start on the yellows in the background and then the turquoise. Get all your flowers done as you want them. That's
I
nice.
wanted leaves,
That's fine. No, that's lovely. Yeah, I would. I'm absolutely with you. You get some smashing effects. Leave it alone. Yeah. You can incorporate them or go as far as you want. It's up to you. Painting loose like this is what I've said before. If you start loose, you can finish tight. You can't start tight and finish loose. So if you're having lovely loose bits amongst it, then you can keep
Green
those.
in the red poppies.
Yeah, because there is green. Remember
Yeah,
I did
that's
that
what I remember
light green tint
Now that you've told me.
at the very end. Yeah, because it was amongst the. That's what people forget. They think, oh, red flower, blue sky,
Yeah.
green trees. One colour comes into another always. And you've got to then think, well, how far am I going to go? Actually, I mean, I'm almost there with this picture in many ways, so I don't go too much further.
I want to start.
You need to lose that white in the background.
Yeah, I know, but if I spray it, it's going to all go on.
Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to lose those edges. You have to do that because it's maybe a bit further away. That's it. You need to get all of those edges softened in.
But you didn't. You still left white, didn't you?
Nope.
Oh, you didn't leave any
No.
white at all. Okay.
No, I didn't want any white. I've a little bit here that I'm having to cover over now. But
You'll spray it.
what I would be doing is putting a bit of water or spraying that area and putting the dark in and letting it spread out to get the effect,
Yeah,
like you would with an iris.
Yeah. Okay.
So I drop the dark in afterwards. So water first, yeah.
Just have a lovely evening fishing down there, good sea trout hunting. That happens really. Finishing the night, a lovely sky and sunset's going down. We're going for a pint.
Well, I had a wonderful time away with Derek and Bev, staying there at Boston Spa, doing the fishing and those paintings on plein air. But at the end of one of the evenings fishing, we had a beautiful sunset. We had a couple of beautiful sunsets. One particular one over some poppies. It was in fact this one, which I'll show you now on screen, and absolutely lovely. And I thought, well, I thought it'd make a nice oil. I thought I would do a pastel with water again. I know one of the viewers on YouTube said the other day she wasn't keen on the look of that because it was neither here nor there, but a lot of people have given positive compliments. She felt that watercolour was better because it's more translucent and had its own beauty, which it does. This is not meant to be a watercolour, remember, this is water with pastel, not watercolour. Water with pastel is much more opaque. It's not transparent, it has a slight transparency to it. The idea of it for me is that it's fast. It was originally intended to be used with acrylic inks so that I could use the pastels over the top with a very liquid way, a very loose way, a very vibrant way. And her second comment was that it wasn't so vibrant as pastel, which I disagree with. I quite understand that it's not like watercolour, but it wasn't intended to be. It's intended to be with its own beauty. and looseness. So what we do here is we build up the base colours with the water and pastel, and those base colours become fixed when they're dry. So once this paint has become dried, it doesn't move when you put more pastel on top. It will take more coats, which is quite useful. We're using a hot press watercolour paper here. I could have used a textured for this one, but I want to use a hot press. And I'm going to use a couple of different brushes here. We're going to use the oval mop again, and I'm going to also use this rake brush, which is rather nice, because the rake brush will hopefully give me the texture behind for the grasses and the stems of the poppies. So the wash brush will be there to blend in the underpainting to get the base colours for putting the other colours on top of. And we should get as vibrant a picture as with pastel paper, if not more so. So it's silly to say that it doesn't give the same effects as a pastel on pastel paper. Of course it will do. With pastel, it's best to put the coats on first anyway and block and blend in the old traditional method. Asherton Stone, for instance, was a great artist with this. And in that case you block and blend in your colours underneath, but they become dull because they're blended. And then you put the lighter, fresh colours on top as a final. You always want to put your light, fresh colours on as a final and not touch them at all if possible. Don't even spray them. Get a nice big double mount and make sure that it's always laid on this back. So in this case it's exactly the same really. Instead of using pastel paper and just working over the top and blending, I'm using water and blending, which fixes it, and then I'm putting the final coats over the top with just fresh pastel and no brush at all. Although I'm going to use some brush textures in between just to show you the versatility of this method. So let's enjoy this and get this lovely evening soft half light as the sun goes down across these poppies near Boston Spa. Right, let's make a start on this work then. Now you can put water on first and then the pastel, but it looks very dark immediately. It doesn't blend as well. I'm going to put the pastel on first, and for my base coat I want a nice soft blue grey. So I'm going to add this on to work out where things are going to go first, but with the grey in fact. Let's have a look now. It's just above halfway here. Our trees, that's the horizon line, so the horizon line's about here. I want to get that the same both sides. So 1, 2, 3, a little bit. So there we go, 1, 2, 3. That's going to be going right across here, almost level. Just work out a very light composition with the drawing first, just so I know where my shapes are going. And again about a third up, so about here. We've got the tree coming over. About halfway here. Trees. About these distant ones there. Right, so I'm just going to go right the way across here first with my pastel, sideways on. It doesn't use too much pastel this way. That. As I say, as I was saying just now, I do want to finish up with my final coats not being water at all, or not being smudged at all, just maybe a little blending and that's it. With that one. Now on top of that I want to lay some very light blue, some turquoise, some very light blue turquoise. Which will blend in with that. I mean, I could, if I just smooth that in, look, you can see you could almost do it with the pattern paper alone. This hot press is actually more like a knot. It's got a very slight texture to it, and I would have preferred a smoother surface, but I think we're going to get by. Right, now, take the water and blend it. Now it goes very, very dark when you blend it at first. It seems far too dark, but it will dry a lot lighter, and you've got to take that into account. It will dry back to the original pastel colours. So all I want to do at the moment is just get these background tones in, so I can work the lighter over the top or the darker over the top afterwards. I'm going to go right over the trees here because they're going to come through slightly. Get the water going. It dries very quickly, especially in a warmer day, which this isn't. You can hear with the rain behind me at the moment. It's quite a wet day to say the least. And then blend that right up. You can see, treat it just like a watercolour. I'm not saying that lady mistook.
but this is a watercolour. It's a water and pastel technique. Why? Just because I'm using it with water, they take it as being anything like a watercolour. It's not. It's got a lot of the same beauty in the fact you can make it very fluid and loose, and you can use the brush to make different effects. Right, so I'll just let that dry off and then I can work my pastel over that. Now coming down to these colours here, again we want to get some quite dark greys, warmer dark greys, and I'm going to mix two down here. I'm going to come in with quite a warm green grey at first here, all the way down. You see what happens when you go over the wet, it goes slightly stronger. I'm just letting that break through the surface here. You can see what happens with the effects of the wet over the dry over the wet, like that. Right back into the distance here. I'm going to put some bluer colours over there later. This is just to get me started. Put the way through, down to here. Now I'm going to bring this darker colour right through in a minute with the brush. So there we are, that's nice and dark. And again, take my water and brush. Just blend that. You don't need too much water on this one because it's not a very big area. Don't worry about things spreading down like that because we're going to go over that with pastel afterwards. It's a very forgiving way of working. If you make a mistake, you can go back and correct it very easily. It's a very fast way of working, which with an impatient person like me, which Derek will appreciate, is necessary. I get bored very easily. You know, it's very fast, which means I can capture this before the scene changes too much. Coming up into that tree there, I'm going to put some light back in. We're going to cut back into this painting later, so don't worry about those trees not being absolutely correct. Won't matter. Just softly into the background there, just blending them back in. All the way along to the distance. We're going to put blues over there more later anyway. Bunch of trees here. So you can paint them in. I mean, I could quite happily paint in a line somewhere else because I've got it on my brush. It's just acting like watercolour. It's saying it's not watercolour. It's you know, it's the same techniques in some ways. I'm not painting transparent paint then. So if I want to, I can come back into here and I can just start to mark in some of the other areas. Bring trees down, draw over. It's just giving me more versatility. Right down to here, to the foreground, a bit more of the foreground. There we are. You get some nice effects. You see the watercolour granulation type effects we're getting there as well as it trickles down. It's quite fun. Next then, whilst that's drying, I want another mid blue green. I want to start my yellow greens. I'm going to bring in a lovely mid mixture for mid yellow greens. Quite strong at first with this deep green. All the way across. So you could do it onto the wet paper, but I don't advise that. I think it's much safer to do it this way. All the way across, and we can mix our pigments together already, so that when I put water on, these pigments are already giving me the sort of base colour that I want. So I want a mid-tone. I'm not putting my very lights on yet. I'm putting my mid-tones in. And my mid-greens. I'll just use that piece up. A little piece of pastel just fell on the floor then. If I keep these bits of pastel, remember that you can just crush them down, mix them with a little water later, and make another pastel out of the paste by rolling them up into a final pastel. They'll just dry out and give you a new pastel. Again, I want to come over there with some more green, so I'll take some mid-green and come across that darker colour to give myself a nice mixture. It's going to dry light. Already you can see the sky is starting to dry lighter. This is much more like a knot paper than a smooth hot press. It's what I was just experimenting with, and I do feel that I can start to even scumble in some greens into this now. Scumbling means just going over the surface lightly. Right, so get the water again, and we'll blend that all the way across. I'm going to work top downwards, as normally with a watercolour, to give myself these lovely tones. Let the paint just trickle downwards with gravity. Plenty of water. You see we get a nice effect of it granulating down. Of course, you've all got your own personal preferences. The lady that didn't like the earlier one and felt that pastel was better, as he said, as pastel can be done and watercolour better for itself. It's all personal taste. I can't see the difference actually in using the pastel this way onto watercolour paper and building up than on pastel paper, but if she can. What worried me was the sort of innuendo that that there's only one way to paint and do it well, and that's rubbish. There are so many ways to paint. Now I'm going to take this paint off here, this green, and start to put some into the texturing here before I put cools back in there, so you can see you're painting with the pastel. Let that come all the way through, blending it down. We want this evening scene where the colours are blending together more. There's quite a nice texture there, you see, of the paint coming down to give me this trickle, this idea of the poppy stems. Let that dry off completely, and I'm going to start to come back in. Now, whilst that's drying, I am doing an experiment here. So I'm playing around with this rake brush, and you can see I'm going to drag these colours now through already the rake, but I want to start to get the feeling of these tangled stems already. And I'm going to drag the rake, this nice big rake, all the way through here to start to get those tangled stems. Experimental, I like to explore a lot, I like to learn new things, not only from other people, but if I don't explore myself, where am I going? So that's quite effective, isn't it? I quite like that idea. And we'll take that further later. So we'll let that dry right off now before I can work back in with the pastels over that. Well, you can hear the rain still pattering on the conservatory roof outside. It's nice to have a painting like this to work on when things are so abysmal, isn't it? Now let's start looking at how we can get this sky to be these lovely pinks and things that we're going to need. I'm going to start adding the pastel over the top, just softly now, blending it in. So you see how that coat, which is dry now, is taking on new pastel so well. I'm going to just blend that down and in, just letting it show through there. Right down into here. I want this pastel coming right through, just with this grey just glowing through here softly. And I want to blend that in. I really don't want too much of the texture showing through. This is why I wanted a hot press paper for this rather than this in between texturing, which I don't really require for this job. It would be nice for a snow scene, but I'm not impressed with this. It's meant to be a hot press. Plenty of pastel on there because I want to really blend these colours in softly together. And maybe just feather in the texture over it. Get a feeling of perspective here by bringing the pastel outwards. There we go. And into that now we want to gently bring our pinks. To start blending in these very gentle pinks put through it, just scumbling over the surface very, very lightly. Scumbling meaning just dragging the pastel across the top, or a brush, almost dry brush across the top. You get this beautiful effect of the glowing pink. Now, I don't see any difference in that than in using the same pastel on pastel paper. Quite honestly, I don't, because we've got the colour glowing through. Remember that pastel papers are a bit dangerous in that the colour will lighten later. They're prone to that, especially in strong sunlight. But these pastels shouldn't. We have done tests on them. In this case, I'm not using the SAA ones, I'm using the Unison ones that I've got, because I just fancy some of these much darker colours that the SAA still haven't perfected yet. I'm going to now bring some of those little bits of pink just glowing through the cloud here as it comes down around the tree. And you see, because it's been fixed, because the wet pastel is now fixed, I'm able to just go in between these trees quite nicely, bring them up. Much stronger pink just going across, glowing through these bits here. I'm going to go even lighter down there in a moment. So I'm going a bit more heavily across this bit because I want these pinks a little bit stronger, just glowing through the trees. Lovely effect we can get, and it's so easy, it's so simple, it's so nice. A little bit brighter with my pink down here, a little bit warmer, just dragging it through, just coming across with the clouds, letting them glow right through here. A little bit stronger up there. Lovely soft effects. Just going back to that blue-grey a little bit. Down into here. Bring it down to the trees a bit more just here. Now you can't tell me that you would know that wasn't on pastel paper. Again, we can blend whenever we like, we can just soften things in a bit if we want to. I need to deepen the trees a bit now. I'm going to take a deep blue and just work that blue across this a little bit, just to give the feeling of the trees being a little bit cooler. But these Unisons, I think, are beautiful pastels. I've always admired them. They used to sponsor me, and I took them all over the world with me, New Zealand and so on, using them, and I've used them all over the place, this country and abroad. They're really value for money, and very, very strong colours. One of the finest pastels in the world. I think between these and the SAA I have all I need in the way of pastels. Now coming down to a much deeper blue still. Really quite dark, and I'm going to actually mix a little bit of black with this in a moment. I don't usually use black, but I just want to bring these colours down a bit more. And I can blend that. I want to soften and deaden it a bit. We're working lights over darks and darks over lights, which is one thing, of course, we can do with opaque paints, is we can work them either way, backwards and forwards, and if we're not quite happy with what we've got, it means that we can improve it or change it. See the strength we can get by working up these from mid-tones to darks. Now, as I was saying, a little bit of black, a little bit of warmth. There we go. We're just going to add this is actually an even deeper blue I'm putting on now, but a bit of the black as well into it, just to give that, the black has a certain, I don't use black much, but it has a bit more warmth in it. And look at that effect we can get now of space and distance. Just going to come back with my light blue a little and just bring some of these little bits of light back through the tree. Again, we can go backwards and forwards, putting these bits in, settling down into here. So I've done my mid-tones and my darks. Now I'm just going to start to bring in some of this lighter colour through the tree. And then we've got to go much lighter still to a cream. Down here next to these trees we've got some very, very light, where the sun is just going down over the top.
There'll be a bit more warmth to this in a moment as well. Quite large this there. But here we've got some streaks in the sky. Rapid this is. I mean, I can do a pastel in about 10 minutes, as I've shown you on my films in Scotland, for instance. About 10 minutes to do a pastel of a sunset going down, because we've got to work that quickly. Now I'm going to take a bit of deep purple here, and on this little bit here where the sun is just going down through, I'm going to bring some of this purple into to show that the sun is behind there slightly. Through this tree here, it can bring it forward slightly as well. Some beautiful colours, aren't there? Press that a little bit harder. I'm getting quite a few layers of pastel on here now, but it's holding it. Coming back to that purple area, and I'm going to put a little bit of orange and red into there. That's where the sun is coming through here. Grass is behind. We're going to leave the flowers till the very end. Just want to drag across a little bit of warmth here and there. With the cools in the background, perhaps just a little of the lighter blue. I'm going to take a little bit of ultramarine and just cool into here a fraction, just to make some of these areas a little bit cooler here, really make the colours glow. There we go, you see the difference that makes. Now a bit of turquoise, deep turquoise for our cools in the background, and I'm going to bring some of that just lightly through here, this misty effect, and a wee bit of pink just across that, not much. Tiniest touch of pink just glowing across the field. Right, I'm going to start texturing now with the, in just a moment, put a little bit darker on that deep green. Where's my deep green gone? Just a little bit of blue and deep green. There's a hedge just coming across here that I want to get back in. And go back with my deep blue. Just put a bit of that blue amongst it, otherwise it's too warm. Right, going to go on to the grasses now. I want to work those up with darks and lights, and I want to use my fan brush a lot more in a moment. You can see I've already got some texture in there. Let's start to bring in some of these deeper greens first, especially down here. Quite new techniques. I'm experimenting all the time, trying something that if it doesn't work. It doesn't work with pastel. We can always go over it again, so I'm not going to make a total mess because I know I can work over it. And if it does, it's only a sheet of paper, and if it does work, well, I've learned something new and I've got a good bit of work out of it. Right, let's see what happens now when I take some water on my fan brush and I start to drag this colour through. You see how I can take these darks that just put onto the surface now with the fan brush and drag them through. Now I couldn't do this just with pastel techniques alone, so this is something quite new that we're experimenting with. I said fan one, so you can do it with a fan. The fan will break up in the same sort of way, which is quite nice. And it's softening back as I do this, because as it dries it's not as dark as when I first do the texturing. Go much finer just up into here, just tickling those colours up into there. So we're going misty into the background. We usually go from warm to cool in the background, but with a sunset or a sunrise that reverses, and we find it going often from cool to warm because it's much warmer in the background. Now look at that effect. I don't know whether you like it or not, but I'm finding it quite fun. Right, I want to come back now with the lighter colours, so I'm back to my turquoises again, and I want to start building up the turquoises across here, little bit by little bit. And I'm going to use the rake brush over these to soften them in a moment. It's just well, the rain stopped now, so I can get on a bit and work into this a bit more. Again, I'm going to be using these turquoises just edge on very lightly at the moment, just coming right off the paper here, little strokes so that I can crisscross with these later. And again, as I said just now, you see how fast this technique works. It's a very, very fast technique, very rapid, especially if you want to work out of doors on plein air. Again, I'm going to just drag that across the surface like this. Because I'm going to use my rake brush in just a moment. And that's rake, not hake. Again, I've talked about using a fan on this, and a hake would be useful, but at the moment we're just using a rake. And also I'm going to take a little bit of my slightly deeper green and just add some textures of that in here and there. Right, and again, come in with the water, and we'll crisscross to break up these lines and drag them through a bit. Now I want to come in with some darker still, very deep blues, so working from my mid-tones darker and darker, and I'm suddenly going to shoot back into my lights in just a moment as well. So quite chunky at the moment because I'm going to drag this through with the brush. Texture them down. It'll be very hard to make them go like this without the water, they just won't smudge that easily. Again, you see it's fairly well fixed because I want it fairly well fixed due to the fact that I'm going to use the reds over the top for the poppies soon. And then right down to my final darks on the dark side of things. On the dark side, sounds like Star Wars, doesn't it? And into here in the foreground, and that makes the lights and the cools a lot lighter and cooler because of course these darks are warm and much darker, so it recedes everything back slightly. And again I want to come back with my rake over those, just drag through them. Look at the lovely texturing we're getting. Masses and masses of texturing that way. And a little bit of the even lighter blue. And it's about time now to start doing the red poppies. Now for my poppies I'm going to use a deep cadmium red, orange, a pink and two mauves. I'm going to start with the cadmium red, and I can use my brush on that as well, and just touching in all of these colours in the background, work my way across from small to light in the background, gradually get larger as they come forward, just by dotting and dashing really, isn't it? Just making the right shapes in the right places, using the right colours relevant one to another. I could use my water and brush and just blend some of these heads in a little bit more, which I may just do to show you what I mean. Take a little bit of water on the brush and just paint into some of these poppies, the greens, bring them through a bit. Doesn't kill, it just enhances. Right, next I want to be using the darker purple, especially amongst the reds themselves. Almost wherever there's a red there's going to be a bit of the purple amongst it. And then to my lighter purple, back here I'm going to just blend a little bit of that in to the distance here. I can use the edge of the pastel again to put some more stems in. Very corner cutting edge. Come back to my light green blues and just, now I've got the poppies in, just go across a few of them with the stems, and while I'm at it we'll take a very light green, a much warmer green, And let's really brighten things up in places now by putting a bit of the orange in. That's catching the lights up here. Right, back to my rake brush again. We'll just come through some of these slightly lighter pink still in places. Start to feel some of these edges of petals a little bit more. Do you know, I think we're nearly there. I'm just putting more deeper blue in here to link with that bunch of trees in the middle. Again, I'm going to use a bit of the colour from the sky and put a blue-grey in here to some of these spots on the stems. I'm just going to put a little bit more warmer green just from one or two places. And I'd say we're about done. Signature. A bit more of that in here against these blues, against these reds, I'm talking about blues. Just blobs, dots and dashes really, isn't it? Right, we stretched this paper earlier, now it's a matter of taking it off to mount it. So I'll just take my knife, find where the edges, go that way round. You can stretch pastel paper, you know, if you wanted to get a lovely smooth tight surface. I've never actually needed to, but it is possible. Lift this off, there we go. Now this is putting a mount, so the mount is up. I pre-cut most of my mounts so that I can come straight on. I don't want a very light mount with this, but a nice medium tone. Going to lose a little bit of the sky, I can see there. Decide how much we want to lose of the sky and how much we want to lose of the poppies, but I think I can afford to lose a little bit more of the poppies. Somewhere about there should do it nicely. Then I'm going to use sellotape to stick it onto the back. Most important thing at the moment is to keep the mount clean, so clean fingers and using a broad tape all the way along like that, and place that next to your painting, your thumb off it, and just place the painting half over it like that, stick it onto that. Now make sure you've got clean hands again, come back. I haven't fixed it, don't like fixing pastels because it makes them duller. You've got your corners marked, so we can drop it onto those corners and press with a clean hand along those edges. Painting's going to stay there then, turn it over, it shouldn't touch the table and make a mess, and you can then do the rest of the taping. Turn it the other way up again, and we're going to now put some cellophane on. That's a big roll of cellophane, take away the painting, and roll out the cellophane. Make sure you've got enough to go around the painting, so a bit more than I expect to have there. Lay the painting upside down on that, like so. Fold around your excess, like so. And bring over this part that just overlaps. Get some scissors, trim it off. There we go. Now we need to have enough sellotape bits cut. So stick this together, make sure it's nice and tight there. Do this joint, don't want that loose in there, but that's nice and straight, no kinks. Let's see if we can get some nice hospital bed corners. And you can use smaller tape if you want for this part. Tuck the corners under. Right, cellophane's on, so we've got a lovely picture protected. Well, there we are, our finished painting in pastels using water and pastel. Say, nice and vibrant, far more texture than you can normally get with just an ordinary pastel itself, and you wouldn't know it wasn't standard pastel technique, I don't think, except that it goes a stage further, and I've shown you how to mount it as well. So there we are, a matter of an hour or two, way I'd work out of doors in the same way, nice and loose. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it helps you to make some lovely pastels as well.